have some are from my collection, and some are from books that I have at home too. So I tried to really limit this to some particular figures in the 1920s that were very famous for recording. So a couple of those names, George Hamilton Green and his brother Joe Green. Lou Green was also their brother, and he was a banjo player. And so they recorded some stuff in Omaha, Nebraska when he was when they were working as a family. Sammy Herman, who was one of the most recorded in New York and did a lot of broadcasting on NBC as well. And I think every morning on the NBC program would record with Frank Banta. So pretty cool with that. Another one is George Lawrence Stone, who there's the Stone Drum Company that was out of Boston, Massachusetts. And the family, I'll be able to tell you a little bit about him as well, but again, influenced by George Hamilton Green, as was Sammy Herman. And then one of the last figures that we'll talk about is my favorite, Teddy Brown, who was the 400-pound xylophone player, born in the United States, but then immigrated to the UK, and that's where he was until he passed away in 1946. But this all starts with mallet instruments. And so I found some really neat advertisements, and one of the main companies was the Degan Company, which was based out of Chicago, Illinois. And this was by John Calhoun Degan, who formed the company. And the company lasted from 1880 to 1984. The building still stands today. It's now called Century Mallet. And I think Andreas is the owner of that, and if you want to have instruments tuned, they do that. They do great work there. I'm hopefully going to buy myself a Degan Xylorimba one of these days, which is model 4726, which the neat part about that is the lower end of the instrument is a marimba, the higher end is a xylophone. And so you can do a little bit of work with both, okay? Big difference that people ask, and I think what I get questions about all the time is someone will send me a picture and like, hey, how much is this xylophone? And it's a picture of a bell set. And so people don't know the difference between bells and xylophones and marimbas, okay? The marimba gives a very smooth, lush sound with long tones and a lot of decay to it. So if you hit a note, it may have about a 2 to 3 second decay. And so it's very melodic. You see a lot of percussion students playing 4 mallets and doing a lot of rolling, so it has a rich, almost like organ type sound when they're rolling on it. Okay? A xylophone I call like a hot knife through butter. As soon as you hit it, fast decay and the sound is gone. And it all dependent on the type of mallet you use as well. The bells, which I had last night and I used just a couple times, those have a very long decay. Those are made of metal. Xylophones and marimba are made of wood. You can find xylophones that are made of keylon, which is like a plastic material, which you literally could just be annihilating it with whatever you want, even a hammer, and it probably wouldn't even crack the bar. So, but the tone with a keylon is not good compared to an actual wood instrument. So that's why anytime you can play a xylophone or marimba, use wood, pajuk or rosewood in particular. Keylon, K-E-L-O-N. So I have a lot of notes here because it's a lot of information. As I said, this is my secondary instrument. Percussion is first. So I want to make sure I have dates right, so I have a lot of the information that's going with what you'll be seeing in the slides. And I have some audio examples as well. And if you have a question at some point, just throw your hand up. I'm more than happy to answer that. And if we do a lot more questions than what we have here, cool, that's fine with me. But I do have sheet music on display, which I'll be talking about, as well as a couple method books from George Hamilton Green on the piano. So you get to have some of that sheet music connection here and then the method books. The Degan factory is located on Bertram Avenue in Chicago, and as I said, it still stands today, the building. So you can see the big clock tower, the bell tower that they have there, and I actually will show a picture of it in a second. But what I love about the Degan company is they had some pretty cool ads, and I love all these Art Deco ads. So it says, I love this Degan xylophone, make big money for their users. That still has yet to come for me. So I'm a Degan player and it's not coming in yet. And as it says there, xylophonists, and this includes performers on the marimba and marimba xylophone, which is your xylo marimba, are working constantly and getting high salaries. Why? Because the up-to-minute dance orchestra leaders know that these instruments provide the pep. What about you? So in the early days, when we had ragtime, is you had the percussion instruments, but as dance bands were starting to get bigger, going, let's say, from a 5 or 6 piece up to 10 piece, they wanted to have percussion involved. So the arrangers were now writing music so that the percussionist would have, as you saw last time with my big bass drum and snare drum, that was in front of them, and then a mallet instrument could either be off to their left or to their right. So then they'd have to then put their sticks down, grab the mallet to possibly play a bell part, or while they're playing with the left hand doing a press roll, grab a mallet and then play the mallets while they're still playing the bass drum and the snare drum at the same time. So it's multitasking, and that's what takes a percussionist to play those instruments. There's a difference between percussionists and drummers. Drummers are merely snare drum and drum set players. Percussionists are those that play timpani, mallet percussion, all the auxiliary percussion, snare drum, drum set. They play everything. And in middle school, that was one thing that I learned from my director at 7th grade. And he's like, you are a percussionist. You play all these instruments and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And so, okay, got it. So then we had a substitute teacher. And he comes in, and he's an older gentleman, and that was 1992, so he was already in his 70s, so he comes from the old school days. And he kept stopping our section, and he kept saying, drummers, I need you to do this, drummers. And so I was the percussion leader, and I raised my hand, and I said, sir, can you please call us percussionists? I said, we're percussionists, not drummers. And so he wrote me a blue slip, which if you got a blue slip, you were sent to the principal's office. And so I was sent to the principal's office, and I'm like, what did I do? And then the principal's like, well, we'll let your band director deal with this in the morning. I don't have time for it. And my band director was very strict. Like, if you got on his bad side, you knew it. And so the next morning, I was called into his office, and I never got in trouble. So I called in, and he's like, so what's this blue slip that you got yesterday? I said, well, the substitute teacher said, drummers, 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 and I said, we are percussionists. And he took the blue slip and he ripped it up right in front of me. He said, I've taught you well. Very good. He goes, I will talk to him the next time he's in town. I'll make sure he calls you percussionist. He goes, you've earned it. And so I'm like, thank you. And so I was sweating it because I would have been grounded at home with my parents as well. So, but I'm going to go on here. So this is the Degan factory in Chicago. And still stands today, and it's a beautiful old building, and they are actually up on the top level where they actually have their current store with Century Mallet. And they still have old Degan instruments inside there, and you can go in and play them, or again, as I said, if you have an instrument, you want to get it retuned, they can do that. It just takes some time for them to retune per octave. If there's a crack in the bar, they can fix that as well. They're pretty remarkable for what they can do for repairs. And I think they are one of the only ones in the world really doing work like that anymore. And they get instruments sent to them from all over, from symphony orchestras and all over the world to do their work. As it says right there, drummers everywhere are seeing the light, are you? Again, talking about percussion. And really pushing the percussion instruments, again, because they have the drum companies going, but they really wanted to push that. Now it says Degan bells, xylophones, and marimbas, Switzer brothers, and so they were advertising these instruments. But one thing that you'll see on there, I do have it. The cool thing about having cats is you have laser pointers. So I borrowed my cat's laser pointer, so I can actually try to point out if I can. And no, I can't with the screen. Okay, on the top left there, where it says Negade Xylophone. Okay. Does anybody know what Negade stands for?
It's Degan backwards.
You got it right. It is Degan backwards. That was their way of selling Degan instruments, but calling them Negade xylophones. Pretty cool. So, and getting around the corners that way. So, but you can see on there they have xylophones. They have the drummer's special. There's the Negade marimba, orchestra bells, and then the song bells as well. And so the orchestra bells are very similar to what I have set up in McComas Hall that I'm playing. They're actually a pit set of bells that I have, so you can actually fold them up into a case and walk out of them just using a handle, very simple. And I actually have the original stand that goes with that as well for it to sit on. But again, really, really cool. Now I love this too. Degan Unifon exploits Chaplin pictures. And so some of you have probably never heard this, as it says, expert operator presides over instrument in street parade, which draws attention of all Chicago. Played like the piano, has tone volume of a brass band. So he sat in the back seat as the driver was driving around there. So don't know if anybody has ever seen that yet. Looks like Jeff hasn't. So yeah.
I have not. Thank you very much for taking just a second to read this.
So now you know you can ask Ann for your next anniversary. So the Unifon, put it in your car.
Bite your tongue, Josh.
So again, this is one of the reasons why I love the teens and 20s so much. They were creative. There's so many unique ideas from music to clothing to style and Art Deco paintings and musical instruments and styles. Absolutely love it. And a couple more little ads from the Degan company. It says, Mr. Drummer, which position do you fill? A Degan xylophone will keep you behind instead of below the footlights, help you to quadruple your salary, serve you a lifetime. It is easy to buy, easy to carry, always a hit. 160 different instruments to choose from the Degan company. Pretty cool. Now there's your Wurlitzer new round top banded orchestra bells, Wurlitzer rosewood negate xylophones. So there again is your Degan xylophones. And now this is what I love. Let's say you wanted to get number 1229, 2.5 octave chromatic, 30 bars, G to C. Price was only $37.28 to buy that. Sign me up. So today, if you were actually to buy something like that, you're probably looking at between $1,500 and $3,000 easily. The bell set that I actually have I'm using tonight, I actually found at a flea market. I love to frequent flea markets and antique stores back home. Midwest has a lot of great records and instruments that pop up. So I was in this one and I found my bell set, my pit bells. Oh my gosh. And they had $50 on it. So I talked them down to $40 on it because I thought it was like a school bell set. And it had Leedy stamped on it, and I'm a Leedy player, love it. So then I got it home and I looked up the price and it's about $1,500. So I got a really good deal, and they sound beautiful as well. So my wife was very happy with that purchase that I had. So. And speaking of the Leedy company, let's switch over here. Okay, so in 1902, Ulysses G. Leedy started the Leedy Drum Company. And Degan had already been going. I thought it's pretty cool that we're across from the library here, and I get to say Ulysses G. Leedy here. This was 78,000 square feet that they had for this manufacturing company. And they were ones that were hopping on with doing percussion instruments, bass drums, all the traps, snare drums, cymbals, and they also did a lot of xylophones, marimbas, and then started getting into more as time went on with new inventors that were coming through. And one of those was the great George Hamilton Green. Here he is with Mr. Leedy. This is in 1927, and that's inside the factory. And when I see these photos, I just start drooling almost, because it's like, look at all the cases and the instruments that are right there. I mean, these are just brand new right off of the plant floor, just absolutely gorgeous. George Hamilton Green was really responsible for a lot of what came out of the Leedy company for his ideas. He's an inventor. And so I'm going to be talking about him in just a little bit here. So that was one picture. And then this is when they were tuning a bar. And the name of, I like to say this one right here, Herman Winterloff is in the overalls there. And he was one of the engineers that was making the instruments back in the day. But they were always, like tuned chromatic bars was one of the ideas that really came from George Hamilton Green when he was there. So again, from 1927. Okay. So with George Hamilton Green, there is, as I said, a lot of information about him. So I'm going to give you, again, Cliff Notes facts, okay? He was born on May 23rd of 1893 in Omaha, Nebraska. And as I said, he had two brothers. He had Joe Green and he had Lou Green that were also musicians as well. He passed away September 11th, 1970. Location is unknown, but in the later years of his life, he lived in Woodstock, New York. And so my guess is he probably passed away around in that region there. At the age of 4, he was already an accomplished pianist. And then at age 11, he took up the xylophone. And so he was already starting to have all that piano knowledge. And I'm sure once he started seeing those ads for the xylophone, probably thinking, hey, maybe I can make some money off of this. And so at age 11, he took up the xylophone. He was playing to crowds of about 7,000 to 10,000 people is what he was playing to at age 11. Pretty remarkable with that. In 1916, with his two brothers, he recorded for the Edison label, and then they were also the sound crew for the first 3 cartoons put out by Walt Disney. And so again, really getting their name out there. Now, the vibraharp, or the vibraphone that we call it today, George Hamilton Green was one of those inventors of that instrument. And the person that was trying to get him to do that was none other than Nat Shilkret. Because Nat Shilkret wanted a particular sound since he was doing a lot of radio. And so he said, hey, is there a way that we can do an instrument like this? And so Nat Shilkret's kind of taking credit for the vibraphone, even though that was a George Hamilton Green invention. One instrument that I have at home is the Leedy case vibraphone. And I like that more than the regular vibraphone because, again, you put a lid on it, has a handle, and you can just carry it on out. It's not like the big frame that comes with the vibraphone, which is also made of metal. But it has a working motor inside of it, and it has an AC and a DC switch, so if I wanted to hook it up to a car battery, I could do that. But I just plug it in, and it's got the resonators with the fans that spin underneath to give the vibrato effect. So pretty cool with that. And I actually have a book that you can actually see what that looks like as well. In 1940, George Hamilton Green retired from performing. A lot of that was due to his brother Joe passing away in 1939. Is that they did a lot together. And he's like, things just weren't the same. And you have to imagine music was also evolving in that time because the xylophone was an acoustic instrument. And so once the electric method came out in 1925, you didn't see as much happening with xylophone players or even with vocalists, like Billy Murray in particular. He was one that was an acoustic vocalist. And once that electric method came out, he didn't do that much. I actually have him singing with the Gene Goldkid Orchestra, and that was in 1927, but if you look at his discography, once that 1925 year hits, you don't see a lot happening, because his vocals were meant to be acoustic. And then as the time goes on in the 20s, instruments kept evolving, as did the sound. And so when the Green brothers were recording with their novelty band, that was with trumpet, trombone, and tuba, again, acoustic sounding instruments. But again, when the method changed, they switched from violins, and they added violins instead of trumpets. They had saxophones, they had string bass, so it was more instruments that could be recorded with an electrical microphone. And so that changed their whole sound and style as well. The Green brothers also switched instruments. They went from a xylophone to a marimba. And that's why I wanted to start today talking about those instruments, because then they could play a marimba, which could be picked up by a microphone very smooth and hear all those lush tones coming out when you're doing the rolls. And so they were able to do that. And they knew that xylophone was kind of on the way out, so they wanted to stay with the times, and then that's why they went with the marimba at that point. So in 1983, George Hamilton Green was inducted into the Percussive Arts Society Hall of Fame, which was rightfully deserved because he's one of, I call the founding fathers of xylophone play. A lot came from him, and he was, a lot of other musicians were influenced by what he did in the 1920s. And so there's a couple more pictures I have. This is his solo tone model xylophone made by Leedy. And yes, the mallets we'll be kind of getting into as we go on here. I'm going to keep close track of my time, so I know it's going to be moving along. Mallets are a whole, I could actually do a whole other segment just on mallets. Wouldn't be too exciting, but there's so many mallets that are out there with that. A little bit closer up image so you can see the mallets. Those were a hard plastic that he was using back in the day to really project the sound. And we were talking right before I started doing the presentation about mallets, is that each mallet gives a different type of tone. You have a soft mallet, medium soft, medium, medium hard, hard. Those are all a rubber series. Then you have a yarn series that are like that. And so mallets are not cheap these days. And so you got to really take care of them. And if they snap, it's usually around 40 to 50 bucks for a pair of mallets. And so that's why a percussionist stick bag is normally over $500 worth of mallets, just the mallets, and you haven't even talked instruments yet. And so when we were playing last night with Jeff and I, which we'll be doing again tonight, looking forward to it, I'm playing a medium rubber mallet on the xylophone. And this is the xylophone right here from Mississippi State University. It's not my xylophone, so medium mallet will not damage the bars, it will not crack it, it will actually care for it. If I actually used a black harder mallet, very similar to this right here, this could actually dent the bars, it could scratch the bars, because this is just hard plastic hitting wood. And so yes, it'll give a very bright sound, but I would do that on my xylophone if I needed to for the room, but since this is not mine, I let Jason Baker know here, hey, I'm not gonna be using a hard mallet, I'm gonna be using this. And he's like, I really appreciate you taking the time to let us know what mallets you're using for the care of our instrument, because that makes me feel better. And so I've always learned that if you borrow an instrument, you return it in better condition than you found it. So that's why I'm using the proper mallet. So it may sound a little bit soft in there, but it's a perfect dynamic for what Jeff and I are doing for just piano and xylophone. So otherwise, it would just be an earful of xylophone, and his right ear would be gone by the end of the night. So.
Just a quick question, Josh, as you change your notes.
Yeah.
How much discussion have you had with cornetist Lou Green?
He knows I'm a big fan of Teddy Brown, and so he sent me the 4-disc set that they had of all the Green brothers, pretty much their catalog of recordings.
I wonder if he has any information you don't yet have, or that is not
I'm sure
outside of the family.
Yeah, I actually need to talk to him a little bit more. So because there's been, I'm one when I research a musician, I like to research somebody who's not as well known. And there's a lot of people that know who George Hamilton Green is. So I'm like, okay, he's already been covered. Who hasn't had their name out there yet? And so that's why I try to bring those musicians back in. Because yeah, George Hamilton Green was one of the most recorded xylophonists of the 1920s, and even into the 30s as well. If you needed something done, you usually called George Hamilton Green. They would call his brother Joe Green, and he'd come and record as well. They didn't call Lou because he was a banjo player, so he should have stuck with the Mallet route. He probably would have done well. But then you had Teddy Brown, who was also doing recordings in the 1910s and the 20s. And so he wasn't in competition with George Hamilton Green, but they were both really exciting xylophonists in a different style. So it all depended on what they wanted. Did a lot of band leaders like xylophone players? No, they did not. Because they just thought it was just a loud, obnoxious instrument, kind of like an accordion or a banjo could have been back in the day as well. But the xylophone, as you'll hear here in just a second, it's a very melodic and neat sounding instrument. And when it's played correctly and played musically, it sounds good. And I'm not meaning that in a bad way. But the Leedy company loved George Hamilton Green, and so they really advertised him as kind of their main salesman and really representing the company. So as you see all these ads for the endorsements by celebrities today, he was the celebrity for Leedy. As I said right there, the world famous Victor phonograph star. He recorded for Victor Company with the All-Star Trio, but as well as most any other label in the 1920s. He was either under a pseudonym or doing something. He was playing because groups wanted to have his xylophone sound in there. But what I love about it, I'm gonna have to go up to the screen, it's really small, you can't see it. That says, you can hear him on, and it lists all the stations here. But what I love is it says WOC Davenport, Iowa, where I'm from. And WOC stands for World of Chiropractic, because that's where chiropractic has their college, Palmer College of Chiropractic. So that's why it's WOC. And it's still, there's actually still WOC radio today. So, and I'm actually friends with the Palmer family, so, which is really exciting. So they love to see little ads like this when I send them like, hey, there's our WOC call letters. That's great.
Josh, just on the subject of family, Jeff mentioned Lou Green, the cornetist. Is he from that family?
Yes, yeah, Lou Green, yeah. That's,
He's son of one of the...
Grandson,
Grandson.
I believe.
Yes.
Grandson of George Hamilton.
Yep.
That's why I know he's well known, but before Lou goes, someone needs to collect those. He'll never put anything out on his own.
Right.
But if you can collect it from him, then we'll have even more.
Oh, exactly, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And
you know,
there's a research center, a gentleman named David Harvey. Have you heard of David Harvey before?
I have not, no.
Okay, so David Harvey, he's in Pennsylvania at the Kutztown University. It's the Wells Rapp Center for Percussion Research. And it's an entire section of the university that's dedicated to mallet and marimba research. And David Harvey really helped spearhead that university for having this center there. So it's kind of like how you have the Templeton Museum here. They have, if you want to learn about mallets, you can go to Kutztown and learn about it there. So I have yet to get there. I have a lot of information I can share with them, and David Harvey and I communicate quite a bit together. So, so it's exciting. But George Hamilton Green wrote a lot of xylophone solos, which were, again, published, and I actually have a couple of those up here. They're not the original ones. They're done by Meredith Publishing. But he also did xylophone solos from other composers. He composed a lot himself, and that's how he really made a name. But he could also take, let's say, Nola, there it is right there. He could play that. Butterfly Dance, and so he had his own version that he would play in his style of each one of these songs. But if you were a xylophone player and wanted to learn how to play it, there you go. Only $1, not bad. And so again, these are some advertisements from the Leedy Manufacturing Company about George Hamilton Green. So it says he plays Leedy instruments exclusively. Xylophone, marimba, vibraphone, harpophone, chimes, bells, etc. A harpophone was kind of similar to a vibraphone, had long resonators and built in like a case vibraphone as well. And so I almost had one at a store, but they had sold it before I could get there, unfortunately. Now this was the George Hamilton Green model solo tone xylophone, which I love, with wheel brakes, okay? That's important because if you're playing and you get the momentum going on the instrument, it would wheel away from you. So they decided, well, we got to stop that from happening, so they put the brakes on the instrument, okay? Now the problem is when you have a setup crew that doesn't know how to manage a xylophone, they may start pushing the instrument with the brakes still on, and all of a sudden it's just dragging, leaving black marks all over the place, or it could actually break the frame. When I play my local symphony back home, we have an Adams marimba, and I always make sure the brakes are off. I've taught them how to do that and how to move instruments properly without damaging them. But what made these instruments really exciting was that they had a hand-carrying case for the model. So you could break it down, put it into 2 cases, and made it a lot easier to transport. They don't make them like that anymore. I wish they did. But everything back in that day, when they were making cases, was because the bands were traveling. They were playing dance halls. They were playing cinema houses. So they needed to have an easy way of transporting it because they didn't have vehicles we have today. They'd have to pack possibly an entire group into a band bus, and the percussionists had the most items. And so they had these cases for the xylophone, and then the Berry Drum Company out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, actually made a bass drum that collapsed down into a case probably about 16 inches wide by about 12 inches tall. So the whole drum would just fold up. And I actually own one of those. It's pretty cool, and it goes into a 26-inch bass drum. But if you need to have a little tight area, just go right in the car, it goes, and real simple that way.
The price has changed a lot from the one you were talking
Yes.
about, $37 and change.
That's right, yeah.
Move the decimal.
And then what you notice too on the lower right-hand corner, just being how innovative he was, it says xylophone and marimba mallet holder. You didn't see those on the older style mallets instruments because where are they going to put the mallets when they're playing? They take a music stand, fold it, and then let the mallets rest on that. This way they could just keep them right in the front part of the instrument, so if they had to switch real quick, just pull them right out and there you go. And so in the old days, they just used the music stand reversed. So that, again, is another George Hamilton Green idea for the mallet holder, just to have them around the front part there. And I love this. Xylophonists and drummers, what the Green brothers have done, you can do. Let them tell you how to do it. So, instruction guides. Now, I don't know who the lady is, but this was for a film, and that's George Hamilton Green's solo tone xylophone. And again, just a beautiful instrument. And as I said, yeah, he was used in recordings and movies and anything that they really needed a xylophone player for. He was one of the main call guys for that. Now, the All-Star Trio. This is what I want to get into for our first example here. This was a group from 1918 to 1923. And I know they had 6 top 20 hits between 1919 and 1921. What I wouldn't give to have their top hits right now today to hear those, instead of what we do here on what's on the radio, whatever that stuff is. But the hits were these. I'll Say She Does, I Want a Daddy Who Will Rock Me to Sleep, Poor Little Butterfly Is a Fly Gal Now, You'd Be Surprised, Swanee, and Moonbeams. Those are their top 6 hits that they had there. So the instrumentalists that made up the All-Star Trio, you'd either have Victor Arden or Frank Banta on piano, of course George Hamilton Green on xylophone, and get the name right. F. Wheeler Wadsworth was the saxophone player. And so he would actually go back and forth between tenor saxophone and alto sax. And I do want to give you an example of what they sounded like. I may not do the whole recording because I know we're time limited with that. But the one I'm going to do from the All-Star Trio is Sensation Rag from 1919. exciting the xylophone sounds, okay? If you actually took out a saxophone and just had piano and xylophone, it sounded like he's just doing his own solo on top of that. So, but that's what made the All-Star Trio so exciting, is that it was high energy like that. And so imagine dancing one step to that, or dancing the foxtrot. You could easily do that. And they were a great group, and a lot of sides that they recorded. That's just one. It's really fun getting to listen to the music that they do create there with the Victor records in particular. So one of the photos that was from, signed by George Hamilton Green. This is going to be another mallet player who was really influenced by his playing. And that was a gentleman by the name of Sammy Herman. And Sammy Herman was born in New York, and he's actually in the very lower right-hand corner of the photo there. I'll point him out. So this is Sammy Herman right here, and then there's George Hamilton Green right there. And so this photograph belonged to Sammy Herman, and it was signed by George Hamilton Green in 1931. And so the neat thing with Sammy Herman is that the Percussive Art Society did a little story on him. And I have those notes here that I can actually tell you about him because he had quite a career. So Sammy Herman was New York's first call xylophonist for radio, television, recordings, and live performances for over 40 years. As a xylophonist for the NBC studios in New York from 1928 to 1966, his career spanned the golden age for both the xylophone and radio, and ushered in the age of television. Let me go ahead, there he is right there. When Sammy Herman's name is mentioned, words of praise come from everyone who ever heard him. Red Norvo recalls, "He helped me get started in New York. We later played together in his large dance orchestras of that time. He was truly at the top." Gordon Stout affirms that. Sammy Herman is one of the greatest xylophonists in our history. Performing with him at PASIC, which is Percussive Arts Society Conference, in 1987 was an extremely special and memorable moment in my musical career. Born May 7, 1903 in Bronxwood Park, New York, Samuel Herbert Herman began his music study at the age of 8, first with piano lessons from his mother, who demonstrated sheet music at Macy's department store, and later with Charles H. Hambitzer, who was also George Gershwin's teacher. Brief lessons from an uncle who was a drummer with the Army Band led to his participation in his high school orchestra, where his performance on xylophone was memorable. Now, the neat correlation with this is that, as it said right there, the uncle was a drummer with an Army Band. George Hamilton Green's father directed an Army Band. Sammy Herman had piano lessons at the age of 8. George Hamilton Green had those at the age of 4. So it's kind of seeing the similarities between these two players, which is really neat. So for Sammy Herman, from the day forward, he had to have an instrument. Herman recalls his first xylophone. It was a beautiful instrument, a Degan Model 870, so there's the Degan. I later found out that my grandmother had agreed to pay half so that she would not have to hear me pestering my father anymore. While still in high school, he began performing for local dances and in small clubs. A chance encounter by pianist Phil Oman resulted in his discovery and acceptance into the Society Bands of New York. Herman's career began to blossom when he landed a job with the Paul Specht Orchestra at the Hotel Alameque in New York City. There he is with the Paul Specht Orchestra. This is a photo from my collection because Chauncey Morehouse is on drums, Arthur Schutt's on piano, Frank Garante is on the trumpet there, and that's Paul Specht with the violin. And up at the top right-hand corner, you have Joe Tardo on string bass. So this was one of the premier bands in New York City, and there he is right on his xylophone. And you notice he has 4 mallets that he's playing with that as well. It's not 2, he's playing 4 there. Let's see. Oh, it was here that Broadway producer Earl Carroll heard Sammy and asked him to play in Earl Carroll's Vanities. For the next year, from 1923 to 24, Sammy played with the Specht Band from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m., then rode the subway 2 stops downtown to start Vanities by 8 p.m. When the show let out around 11 o'clock, he would ride the subway back uptown to begin dance sets with the Specht Band by 11:30 p.m. So he was playing from pretty much 5 o'clock until probably 2 or 3 in the morning, almost every night. Pretty impressive there. A neat thing was that when Herman was in New York, he spent 2 years freelancing, and in 1928, he signed on with the National Broadcast Company Artist Service as the first xylophonist at a starting pay in 1928 of $750 per week. For some of the top artists in radio, the Depression was not even felt. So imagine that. So $3,000 a month that he was making in 1928. Whew. So I guess they were right with those ads that you could quadruple your salary if you were a xylophone player. So, but I do want to play a couple sides. And Sammy Herman passed away in 1995 in Fishkill, New York, is where he passed away. And I actually have two examples of his sheet music up here. I have Dizzy Fingers, Zez Confrey, and Flapperette. And so I'm going to play two examples for you. They're both from the 1930s of Sammy Herman playing, so you can hear the differences. The first one will be Nola that he does. The second one will be the actual copy up here of Dizzy Fingers. Between that and George Hamilton Green from the All-Star Trio. A lot of differences, okay? Now the next one is the one that really blows my mind, and that's Dizzy Fingers. So if you're familiar with the Zez Confrey version, now imagine that now on xylophone.
Friends, here are two featured musical artists of whom you've heard a great deal on Major Bow's Capital Family Broadcast and many other important radio programs. Charlie Magnante and his famous accordion music, and Sam Herman and his renowned xylophone. United now as a complete and unusual musical unit. Listen to them play Dizzy Fingers.
that's why it's my secondary instrument. That is a lot of work and a lot of practice time that goes into it. So if we're to open the music here. So this is his part. All those notes played that fast, okay, which is pretty remarkable. Now, what really some people don't understand with mallet instruments, the bars are only about 1.5 to 2 inches wide. That's it. So if you're off by just a little bit, you're on another note, okay, and that's what takes practice and the accuracy of getting around it. If you're on another instrument, yes, with a trumpet, you got the 3 valves right in front of you, push them down, you notice embouchure as well. But when you're playing with mallets at going that tempo, and to not make any mistakes and make it flawless, that is really impressive. And that's why I have a lot of appreciation for these mallet players that it is their main instrument. That takes so many hours in practice rooms to get sounding that good. So we're at home like that. So that's just a little short information about Sammy Herman, but again, there's not a lot about him, unfortunately, so hopefully some people will want to pick that up and start going from there and find out more information about him. So, but pretty exciting man. So getting back into the Leedy artist here, we have George Hamilton Green, and up in the top left-hand corner is his brother Joe Green. And so he wasn't as advertised as his brother George was. He still played with the Tuxedo Orchestra and did a lot of work himself on xylophone, different from what George was doing. But they had their own group, which was the Green Brothers Novelty Orchestra, Novelty Band. They had to change the name of this group, as I said, when the instruments started changing and the methods of recording changed. So it turned into the Green Brothers Marimba Band. So they changed over to try to keep with the times and keep things flowing from there. But this is George and his brother Joe. And Joe, as I said, passed away in 1939, but he was born in 1902. So he was the older brother of the two. And the youngest was Lou, who was born in 1909 and passed away in 1992. So that's when all 3 brothers had finally passed away by 92. But they did a lot of work together. Now this one, somebody had colorized the photograph. These are all the types of instruments outside of the big banjo bass that you see over there. They invented these instruments. And the one that's down front, really in color there, is made of glass. They're actually glass bars. And I think I've got, oh yeah, so I love this. George and Joe take their morning exercise. Says at least it looks that way. On the other hand, they may be demonstrating the fact that the George Hamilton Green model xylophone is light in weight and just the thing for jobbing. They didn't offer any explanation of the acrobats when they sent in the photo. As usual, they are both going as big as ever over New York's leading radio stations, WEAF and WJZ and their networks. So again, a nice little promotion for their instruments there. Now here it is right here. Reading from left to right, the famous Green brothers, George and Joe, are with us again. This time they are introducing a set of plate glass bells made especially for them by Leedy for use in broadcasting from New York City over the nationwide radio hookups. The bars of these bells are of thick, high-grade plate glass, and while the tone which they produce does not sustain so long as the produced by steel bars, it is very pleasing for certain effects and especially adapted for radio work in as much as the tone carries very distinctly over the air. So that's what we were talking about, again, it was like the decay of the notes after you hit it. So each instrument would give a different effect like that. And these were a list now of the Leedy endorsed mallet artists. So you go from like George Hamilton Green, who was like there in the early 20s, one of the only ones, to now this is about 1930s, and you've got, see, 4, 8, 12, 16, 32 on the page right there. They're now playing mallet instruments. Okay, top right corner is Chauncey Morehouse, one of my favorites. And Joe Green is, I don't believe in here, but George Hamilton Green is in the center page there, on the right page, on the first one there. So.
And a woman there.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so there's Joe Green with the Tuxedo Orchestra. Then here he is with the Victor Solano Orchestra as well. Did a lot of recording with them. Now, Stick in the Mud by Yerkes Jazz-Marimba Band featuring Rudy Weedoff, the premier saxophonist. I have a recording of this, but I know we're getting short on time, so that's why I'm just kind of going through things here. So, now, Sousa and his drummers prefer Leedy instruments, Leedy for the particular drummer. So there's John Philip Sousa on the far right. So that's how important Leedy instruments were. They were known as the Cadillac of the drums and the percussion. If you had Leedy, you had the best. The quality was great with them. And that's why I play Leedy. I love them. They sound so good. Now, George Lawrence Stone, he and his family ran the Stone Drum Company out of Boston, Massachusetts, but then they decided to close that down, and they just went more into like music publishing. But this is another musician that was influenced by George Hamilton Green being on the East Coast there, which was pretty remarkable there. Now, Mamie Smith and her Jazz Hounds. What I love about this is that she was one of the first African-American bands to use a xylophone in 1921, which is really cool to see that. So I have part of an example. It's actually Mort Perry is the xylophone player. I'll play just a little bit of that thing called Love so you can actually hear her band and with Mort Perry on xylophone. Kind of hear the xylophone in the style of playing with Mamie Smith. Again, yes?
Who was the name of the xylophonist?
Mort Perry, M-O-R-T, and then P-E-R-R-Y. So that was the name of that xylophone. It's 1921 was when, and he wasn't with the band on all their sides. They just brought him in to do guest artists at particular times. So now I love this one from 1934, Van Swift. Smallest American man midget with Rose's Royal Midgets, A Century of Progress. So he was part of a vaudeville act in the 1920s, but then kept that going, and you can just see the side of the xylophone compared to him, but was a very accomplished xylophone player. So pretty exciting. Now Teddy Brown is who I wanted to finish with. Here's the 400-pound xylophonist, one of my favorite ones, and absolutely amazing what he can do behind the xylophone. And I was able to, there's another photo. You can see the sheer size of him. That was about a 4.5 to 5 octave xylophone that he played behind, custom made for him. And that's a Degan that he's behind right there. This is when he was still in the States. But this was his home in Southampton, which I actually got to visit the site of that when I was in England this past year. It no longer exists, but literally right where the dog is at on the lawn, that's where I stood. And when you were facing away, literally that's where the English Channel was right there. So he literally had a seafront home, it was on Sea Road actually. And they called that Xylophone House, was the name of it. So Teddy Brown played with the New York Philharmonic in the late teens. And then from there, he went with Earl Fuller's ensemble, which George Hamilton Green also recorded with Earl Fuller's Rector Novelty Band. From there, there's a young Teddy Brown, this is one of the youngest photos we have of him, with Lensburg's Riverside Dance Orchestra. And so he was on xylophone, also played drums with that ensemble as well. And then from there, he went with Joseph C. Smith's orchestra, playing xylophone. Here's another example of the photo. Now, the one here is from David Harvey. This is when they played it at the in Canada. This is before he shipped off to England, was playing there. So, but this is with Joseph C. Smith's there at the I think the Royal Palais is where he was at. And then this was Teddy Brown's band at the Café de Paris in London, which the Café de Paris still exists today. But the next photo, you'll see Getty Images, I had to pull it off online, is that this sat about 3 or 4 stories below the street level in London, but it still was affected by the bombing during World War II. Kind of a sad fact about this, the Café de Paris became the morgue for London, because with it being 4 levels below, it was cold. So if they had to keep a place to store bodies during the war, this is where they took them. It was down into the club. And so it still exists today. This grand staircase is still there. They still use the club for different things, but that's kind of you can see the soldier up in the top left-hand corner there as well. And then sheet music, these are just a couple of the pieces of sheet music that I have of Teddy Brown. Heading for Louisville, which was by Ted Brown and his Café de Paris band. Because you could have had me once, don't think you can have me now. I'd love to be a baby again, by Ted Brown. I'd give the world to know, Teddy Brown and his Café de Paris band. And the neat little thing to end here was the marimba light, a new musical instrument. And how this was supposed to be played was with flashlights. So like the light would hit it and then it would be playing notes. I don't know how they came up with that, but again, kind of neat like that.
You haven't found one of those?
I have not found one of those yet. So. Now, four-hammer playing How to Grip the Hammers by George Hamilton Green. This is how you will be gripping the mallet exactly like so. So your hand looks, so you have the index finger and the thumb that pinch the mallet, and the other three fingers lightly wrap around, so that it's all wrist motion you're doing. Okay, exactly how you see him doing that there. For four mallet playing, correct grip of mallets for the right hand, left hand identically the same as this grip. Note that the mallet handles do not touch or cross. Since this came out with George Hamilton Green, there are at least 2 or 3 other methods of four mallet technique that you can use that were invented. Okay, but this is one that was being used by a lot of the musicians in the 1920s. And this is one that I prefer to use myself. And then getting to the end here, this was the Jeanette studio. You can see the xylophone in there. And they actually, the Green brothers had recorded at the Jeanette studios. And when George Hamilton Green had retired from playing, he became a cartoonist. He loved to draw and draw cartoons. And so when he was trying to reenact like the days of what it was like recording at the Jeanette Records, and it's on the cover of the Lou Green album. This is one of his drawings that he'd have the whole band around him with the horns coming out. So he's like, all I remember is just being blasted by horns all around me and trying to get the recording. But in order to pick up the xylophone for the acoustic method, it had to be that close to the horns for it to pick up that way. And then this is George Hamilton Green at the end of, toward the end of his life, I believe with his sister is what one of the historians had said there. But again, I believe this is in New York where he was at there, but he was happy being a cartoonist. That was his second career after he was performing. And that's one thing that I've always said is that at some point, if I don't have gigs coming in or my music career dries up, I'm not the type of musician that's going to be kicking and screaming. It's like, no, 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 that chapter is over, on to the next one. I've at least been able to do this dream of doing music like this for over 20 years, which I never thought I'd be able to do it for 1 year. And here I'm still doing it for 20 years, and I love it. But as I said, if it ever dries up, great. Just on to the next chapter in life and whatever's in front of me at that point.
What would that be?
Whatever happens at that point, so yeah. So, but any questions, you can feel free to come up, take pictures, or look at the sheet music up here as well, but any questions about anybody? No?
The other thing is that we do have to
Yes.
take a break, a short break, because Lewis Ford will be finishing our symposium part. However, maybe what we could do, Josh, is move this out into the outer room.
Oh, yeah.
So anybody who would like to come along and take a closer look will be able to.
That's perfect. Yeah.
So why don't we take a 5-minute break, have Lewis join us at 3, and then there's a jam session afterwards. But first, how about a real sincere round of applause for our Wilson.
Or not.
Why don't you text him though?
How did you start?
5 minutes. Just write everything okay, you start at 5.
No, okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's all the music's down here.
How wonderful.
I'm called nature anyway.
It can, you just have to stretch.
He's got me.
All right.
How'd you know I was texting? Oh, it's oh, I figured. He's parked it, car. Got on, so I said, you know, the moving fast. He is such a fascinator, I stay on this. Oh, I was like, that's smart, I'm like, dude, you guys
That's why you
something?
see me like doing that afterwards.
I'm gonna take care, we got our puppies with us. So I took them out the potty, did everything I can to speed process of it, you see.
Still pushing?
He's still, he's here, he's here on time. Sounds like me.
Which?
Sharon says
minutes, Lewis Ford will be finishing our talks. But then we're gonna have a big old jam session to finish up, give you a little excitement there. So we'll start probably, hopefully in about 5 minutes. So stretch your legs if you like. Still some coffee outside if you want
Hey,
to
son.
grab some. And we'll be starting soon. Thank you.
Hey, you just not see Mama coming?
All right, great. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, you know that part?
Everybody's freezing.
Very-
Half raised it now, but I can't go any higher.
I mean, I'm at.
Oh, here, by the way, I'm supposed to show you
Yes,
this.
I knew better.
No,
I still have one in my purse. I can put on it.
Put on another leg.
I can put it
I
on.
was supposed to show you this. They developed this for the festival. So now that's it. They said, you're not gonna be able to use little instruments. This is all we're gonna have. This is drones. He started fooling around downstairs.
Yeah, play that.
Oh, piano. Is it yet? I think it's getting mummified.
C part.
Right. Right, Carmen's husband was off. No, I was getting all of this. Right. There you go.
That's, the iPhone now too.